One American fighter surrounded by 8 German wolves, open sky with zero cover. No wingman to call, no rescue coming, nothing except altitude, a half tank of fuel, and a battered notebook crammed with formulas that every pilot in his squadron dismissed as nonsense. Static hissed through the headset as the enemy formation tightened its grip. What unfolded over the next 8 minutes wasn't about guts. It wasn't about reflexes. It was about mathematics. Spring 1944. The heavens above. Nazi-occupied France belonged to whichever pilot could bank tighter, ascend faster, and put rounds on target first. American bomber crews hemorrhaged lives and aircraft with each passing day. German interceptors descended like angry wasps, ripping formations to shreds with devastating precision. The P-51 Mustang existed to shepherd those bombers all the way to Berlin and escort them safely home. But engineering brilliance meant nothing if the man behind the controls didn't comprehend how to exploit it. Most fighter pilots operated on pure instinct. They trusted their stomachs, their reflexes, the vibration of the control column beneath their grip. They absorbed lessons by observation, by enduring, by tallying bullet holes punched through their fuselage after every sortie. The exceptional ones possessed an almost feral intuition, a supernatural awareness of deflection geometry and closing velocities. They never calculated. They simply acted. And then there was Second Lieutenant Arthur Feedler. His flying was different. His thinking was different. And because of that difference, his fellow aviators ridiculed him mercilessly. Feedler was 23 years old, slender in build, wearing wire-rimmed spectacles that fogged persistently inside the canopy. He carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere he went, in the mess tent, along the flight line, even stuffed inside his flight suit during pre-flight inspections. The other pilots took notice. They cracked jokes constantly. They nicknamed him the professor, the academic, the man who preferred studying to actually flying. He paid no attention. He simply continued writing. His unit, the 357th Fighter Group, operated from Rathleaston in Suffolk, England. The installation was a sprawl of Nissan huts, waterlogged taxiways, and the perpetual thunder of Rolls-Royce Merlin power plants. Every morning before sunrise, maintenance crews stripped canvas covers from the Mustangs and prepared them for that day's operation. Every evening, they counted which aircraft returned. Feedler's crew chief, a sergeant from Pennsylvania named Kowalski, genuinely liked him. Feedler posed real questions, substantive questions, not inquiries about painting victory symbols or what slop the mess hall was serving, but detailed queries about engine output at varying altitudes, the center of gravity with external drop, tanks fitted, the precise trim angle required during high-velocity dives. Kowalski answered every single one. The other pilots never asked such questions. They wanted their machines prepped. They wanted them quick. They wanted to engage the enemy, survive the mission, and find a stiff drink. But Feedler craved comprehension. Before every combat sortie, he computed. He determined fuel burn rates across different throttle configurations. He charted the energy states of various aircraft types at multiple speeds and elevations. He analyzed German tactical patterns, not from official briefings, but from classified after-action summaries he borrowed from the intelligence section. He devoured them like university coursework. His squadron mates observed this behavior and shook their heads in bewilderment. One of them, a captain named Derry, informed him bluntly that arithmetic wouldn't rescue him when a Focke-Wulf was glued to his tail. Another proclaimed he would get himself slaughtered by overthinking. A third chuckled and suggested that if he loved calculations so much, He should have enlisted with the engineering corps. Feedler never argued. He simply nodded and continued flying. He wasn't a gifted stick and rudder aviator by nature. His initial training flights were clumsy. His instructors documented that he overcorrected constantly, deliberated excessively, and hesitated during banking maneuvers. But he progressed steadily, systematically. He mastered the physics of flight not through intuition, but through rigorous analysis. He deconstructed every aerial maneuver into component forces, velocity vectors, and attack angles. Then he drilled until his muscles executed what his intellect already grasped. By the time he deployed to England, he was proficient, not spectacular, not fierce, simply precise. His inaugural combat mission was an escort assignment to Stuttgart. He maintained formation discipline. He obeyed commands. He spotted distant vapor trails and monitored frantic radio transmissions. But his element leader kept their flight positioned high and removed from danger. Zero contact. Zero victories. Just 8 hours of freezing atmosphere and aching limbs. The debriefing was perfunctory. Nobody mentioned Feedler. His second mission proved different. They collided with a swarm of Bf-109s east of Mannheim. The formation disintegrated. Feedler found himself isolated, attempting to rejoin. When a Messerschmitt rolled in behind a struggling bomber, Feedler pushed into a dive. He closed rapidly, but the Germans spotted him and executed a violent left brake. Feedler pursued. The 109 performed a snap roll and plunged vertically. Feedler hauled back on the stick, felt gravitational forces compress his ribcage, and lost visual contact. He never squeezed the trigger once. Back at Leiston, Derry demanded to know what happened. Feedler recounted the engagement methodically, step by step. Derry interrupted halfway through and declared that Feedler analyzed too heavily. Just shoot. He commanded, just react. Feedler nodded acknowledgement. Then he returned to his quarters and sketched the entire encounter in his notebook. Every turn radius, every altitude transition, every squandered opportunity. He annotated the margins extensively. Energy state remained insufficient, miscalculated. Enemy roll rate should have climbed rather than turned. He offered no excuses. He simply studied. Arthur Feedler was raised in Dayton, Ohio. His father operated machinery at a tool and die factory. His mother instructed elementary school children. They raised him in a modest dwelling near the railroad tracks, where the 315 freight train rattled the window panes every afternoon. He learned to read early and never ceased. By 10 years old, he was borrowing mechanical engineering texts from the public library. By 14, he was constructing model aircraft with accurate airfoil cross-sections and functioning control mechanisms. He didn't participate in athletics. He didn't pursue romantic interests. He constructed things, and he read voraciously. When he completed high school in 1939, he aspired to study aeronautical engineering at Ohio State University. His father explained they lacked the finances. Feedler accepted employment at a metal fabrication facility instead. He labored the evening shift, saved every dollar earned, and persisted with his reading. He borrowed academic textbooks from the library. He taught himself calculus, fluid dynamics, and structural mechanics independently. Then Pearl Harbor occurred. Feedler enlisted in the Army Air Forces during January 1942. He didn't enlist out of patriotic fervor. He enlisted because military service represented his sole opportunity to get near an actual airplane. The recruiting officer inquired whether he preferred becoming a pilot or a mechanic. Feedler responded, "Pilot." The recruiter examined his eyeglasses and frowned skeptically. Feedler passed the vision examination regardless. Primary flight instruction took place in Texas. The heat was oppressive. The instructors were harsh. Feedler struggled initially. His grip was too rigid, his corrections too violent. But he absorbed everything. He observed intently. He learned rapidly. By the program's conclusion, his landings were smoother than most of his peers. Advanced training occurred in Arizona. There he first piloted a fighter aircraft, the P-40 Warhawk, older, heavier, less tolerant than the Mustang. But it imparted crucial lessons about energy management. He discovered that velocity functioned as currency. You expended it to ascend or maneuver. You recovered it through diving or leveling off. Every action carried a cost. Every choice produced consequences. He maintained his notebook religiously. He documented every flight, every error, every insight gained. His instructors considered it peculiar, but his evaluation flights were flawless. He graduated in the middle of his class ranking. Not the finest, not the poorest, simply consistent. They assigned him to the 357th Fighter Group and transported him to England during late 1943. He arrived at Leiston during early February 1944. The base was frigid, saturated, and reeked of petroleum and damp war. His sleeping quarters were in a hut housing 7 additional pilots. They played poker at night. They consumed alcohol. They shared stories about sweethearts back home. Feedler mostly read. One pilot inquired what he was perpetually scribbling. Feedler explained he was developing something. The pilot asked what exactly. Feedler replied it was a superior method of aerial combat. The pilot laughed dismissively. Another declared no superior method existed. Simply eliminate them before they eliminate you. Feedler didn't dispute the assertion. He just continued writing. What he was constructing was a framework, a methodology, a technique for translating abstract energy management principles into practical, reproducible combat tactics, he labeled it comparative energy analysis. The concept was straightforward. Every aircraft possessed a performance envelope. Velocity, elevation, and maneuverability were interconnected. If you understood your own envelope and your adversaries', you could anticipate the result of any maneuver before initiating it. He didn't invent energy fighting. Veteran aviators and aerobatic performers had grasped the fundamentals for years, but Feedler systematized it. He rendered it mathematical. He constructed tables displaying optimal speed and altitude for engaging different enemy fighter types. He calculated turning radii at various velocities. He mapped lag pursuit, lead pursuit, and pure pursuit intercepts with geometric exactitude. It remained purely theoretical. He hadn't validated it under fire yet, but he was convinced it would function. The spring of 1944 became a slaughterhouse. Across European airspace, the 8th Air Force was penetrating deeper into Germany, striking petroleum refineries, aircraft production facilities, and railway junctions. The Luftwaffe was desperate yet remained lethal. Seasoned German pilots flew Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s with brutal effectiveness. They understood the heavy bombers were the primary targets and pressed their attacks even while absorbing defensive fire from escort fighters. American fighter pilots received training emphasizing aggression. Dive into the engagement, close the distance, fire rapidly. The doctrine was uncomplicated. Close with the enemy and annihilate him. It succeeded when you possessed speed, altitude, or the element of surprise. It collapsed when you didn't. The difficulty was that aggression consumed energy, a sharp turn, a steep climb, a frontal attack. Each depleted velocity, and once you became slow, you became prey. German pilots capitalized on this vulnerability. They would lure American fighters into turning engagements, then break contact and zoom climb beyond reach. Or they would split S and dive away, compelling the Americans to pursue directly into concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Casualties accumulated. The 357th lost 3 aircraft in a single week. 2 to ground fire, 1 to a mid-air collision during a dogfight, Feedler observed. He listened. He examined the after-action documentation. He detected a pattern. The pilots who perished weren't necessarily the least skilled aviators. They were frequently the most aggressive ones, the ones who pursued to persistently, maneuvered to violently, descended to steeply. They exhausted their energy reserves. They transformed into targets. He mentioned this observation once, cautiously, during a mission debriefing. He proposed that perhaps they should engage differently. Perhaps they should manage velocity and altitude more deliberately. Employ physics rather than reflexes. The squadron operations officer, a major named Callahan, interrupted him. He stated that the assignment was protecting the bombers, not exercising caution. He proclaimed that the Luftwaffe respected aggression, not timidity. He informed Feedler that his responsibility was to fly his designated position and follow his leader. Feedler acknowledged understanding. Then he requested permission to offer a suggestion regardless. Callahan exhaled heavily and told him to be brief. Feedler explained that if they initiated engagements with greater velocity and superior altitude, they could dictate the tempo of combat. They could determine when to commit and when to withdraw. They could force the Germans to respond rather than responding themselves. Callahan asked how specifically. Feedler extracted his notebook. He displayed a diagram plotting altitude against velocity, with zones designated for different aircraft types. He explained that if a Mustang entered combat at 25,000 feet and 350 miles per hour, it possessed greater total energy than a Focke-Wulf at 20,000 feet and 300 miles per hour. That energy could convert into either velocity or altitude as circumstances required. Providing the Mustang options the German lacked, Callahan stared at the illustration. Then he looked directly at Feedler. He acknowledged it was an interesting hypothesis. Then he declared that hypotheses didn't win battles. Trigger time did. Another aviator, Lieutenant Harmon, interjected. He said Feedler was overcomplicating everything. He asserted that elite pilots didn't compute. They simply knew. Instinct, he claimed, was faster than mathematics. Feedler nodded. He didn't argue, but later, lying in his bunk, he inscribed a single sentence in his notebook. Instinct works until it doesn't. April 12, 1944. The assignment was an escort mission to Schweinfurt, deep in southern Germany. The objective was a ball-bearing manufacturing facility. Intelligence indicated the Luftwaffe would defend it aggressively. They were accurate. Feedler flew as wingman in a 4-aircraft flight. His element leader was Captain Derry, the same aviator who had instructed him to cease overthinking. They climbed to 28,000 feet and reduced throttle to conserve fuel. The bombers flew below them, a staggered formation of B-17s trailing white condensation trails. The Focke-Wulfs emerged from the sun. Feedler spotted them first. 8 contacts, elevated and fast. Descending in a shallow dive, he called out the sighting. Derry acknowledged and broke left to intercept. Feedler followed. The Germans divided. For targeted the bombers. For remained elevated to engage the escorts. Derry rolled in toward the lower group. Feedler wanted to climb and engage the elevated group, but he maintained formation integrity. That was doctrine. That was discipline. Derry closed rapidly, fired a burst, missed entirely. The Focke-Wulf broke hard right and dove away. Derry pursued. Feedler pursued Derry. They descended through 24,000 feet, then 20,000. The German leveled off and fled eastward. Derry chased relentlessly. Feedler checked his airspeed indicator. 420 miles per hour. Still fast. But they were sacrificing altitude, and the four Focke-Wulfs that had remained elevated were now positioned above them. He transmitted the warning. Derry didn't respond. He was fixated on his quarry. Feedler checked his mirrors. Two Germans were diving toward them. He transmitted again. Derry finally responded. He ordered Feedler to stay with him. Feedler made a decision. He broke formation. He pulled hard right and climbed. His airspeed bled rapidly. 400, 380, 360. The two Germans adjusted their trajectory and pursued him instead of Derry. Feedler leveled off at 22,000 feet and advanced the throttle. His velocity climbed again. The Germans remained above him, but were closing distance. He didn't turn. He didn't dive. He maintained his heading and calculated. He understood the Focke-Wulf possessed superior roll rate at high velocity. He understood it could outturn the Mustang at reduced velocity, but he also understood it was heavier. It bled energy faster during climbing maneuvers. If he could compel them to maneuver vertically rather than horizontally, he could outlast them. The first German opened fire. Tracers streaked past his left wing. He didn't flinch. He pulled into a steep climb, exchanging velocity for altitude. 340 miles per hour. 320. 300. The Germans followed. Their climb rate was inferior. Feedler crested at 25,000 feet, rolled inverted, and pulled through into a split-S maneuver. He accelerated downward. The Germans attempted to follow, but they were too slow. They had depleted their energy during the climb. Feedler leveled off at 20,000 feet, with 400 miles per hour on the gauge. The Germans remained above him, but were completely out of position. He didn't re-engage. He climbed back to altitude and rejoined the formation. Derry had destroyed the Focke-Wulf he was pursuing, but lost awareness of the others. The engagement concluded. Back at Leiston, Derry demanded to know why Feedler broke formation. Feedler provided his explanation. Derry asserted he should have maintained position. Feedler agreed. Then he asked if Derry believed his maneuver had been effective. Derry paused. Then he confirmed it had been. But he warned Feedler not to make it habitual. Feedler didn't make it habitual. He made it systematic. Over the subsequent 3 weeks, he flew 8 additional missions. He tested his energy management principles in small, controlled applications. He would climb before turning. He would exchange altitude for velocity when pursued. He would refuse to pursue enemies below a specific energy threshold. None of it was dramatic. None of it appeared in after-action reports. But he survived, and he learned. The other pilots began noticing. He returned from every mission. His aircraft was rarely damaged. He hadn't claimed a kill yet, but he hadn't absorbed hits either. One of the junior pilots, a second lieutenant named Briggs, inquired how he remained so undamaged. Feedler offered to demonstrate. Briggs agreed. That evening, Feedler spread his notebook across the table in the briefing hut. He showed Briggs the charts, the computations, the energy curves. He explained how to evaluate an engagement before committing, how to recognize when you possessed the advantage, how to disengage when you didn't. Briggs listened. He posed questions. He took notes. Then he asked if anyone else was aware of this. Feedler explained he had attempted to share it, but most pilots weren't interested in hearing it. Briggs suggested maybe they would listen if Feedler demonstrated it worked. May 3, 1944. The assignment was another deep escort, this time to Berlin. Weather conditions were clear, visibility unlimited. The type of day where you could detect the enemy from 10 miles distant, and they could detect you. Feedler's flight was assigned high cover, 30,000 feet, 5 miles ahead of the bomber stream. His element leader was a newly arrived captain named Voss, a replacement with only 2 combat missions completed. Feedler remained flying wing. The other 2 aviators in the flight were both second lieutenants, fresh from stateside training. Voss was anxious. Feedler could perceive it by the way he continuously adjusted his throttle, scanned the sky to rapidly reported false contacts. Feedler maintained composure. He verified his instruments. Fuel adequate. Oil pressure adequate. Manifold pressure steady. He executed his mental checklist. Velocity, altitude, position, energy state, all optimal. Then he spotted them. 8 Focke-Wulf 190s, 6 o'clock high, approximately 4 miles distant, climbing toward the bombers from below. They hadn't detected the American fighters yet. They were focused on the B-17s. Feedler called out the sighting. Voss acknowledged and rolled into a diving turn to intercept. Feedler followed but maintained a shallow dive angle. He observed the German formation. They were arranged into groups of 4, stepped up in altitude, classic Luftwaffe tactics. The lower group would bait the escorts. The higher group would ambush anyone who accepted the bait. Voss didn't recognize it. He dove directly toward the lower group. The other 2 pilots followed him. Feedler didn't. He preserved his altitude and velocity. He observed the lower Germans broke as Voss approached. They scattered, compelling Voss and the others to separate and pursue individually. And then the upper rolled in. They targeted Voss first. He never saw them. Feedler transmitted the ambush warning. But Voss's radio discipline was inadequate. He didn't hear it, or he failed to react. Feedler made the decision instantaneously. He shoved the throttle to maximum power and nosed over, into a steep dive, not toward the lower group, toward the upper one. He accelerated rapidly, 400 miles per hour, 450. 480. The Focke-Wulfs were in a line-Aston dive, focused on Voss. Feedler approached perpendicular, elevated and fast. He didn't attempt to maneuver onto their tails. He flew directly through their formation, firing a short burst as he passed the leader. No impacts. But he captured their attention. 2 Germans broke off Voss and turned toward Feedler. He didn't turn with them. He extended straight ahead, utilizing his velocity to create separation. The Germans pursued. They were faster in the dive, but Feedler had initiated with more energy. He maintained a shallow dive angle, exchanging altitude gradually to preserve velocity. At 22,000 feet, he initiated a climbing turn to the left. Not violent, just sufficient to bleed velocity gradually. The Germans turned inside him, attempting to cut him off. Feedler permitted it. He monitored their closure rate. He calculated. They were closing too rapidly. That indicated excessive velocity, which indicated they couldn't sustain a climb without overshooting him. He pulled harder, tightening the turn. His airspeed dropped to 320. The first German attempted to follow. He pulled harder, yanking the stick back. His nose elevated, but his velocity bled off. He stalled and snap-rolled left. Feedler rolled right and dove, accelerating again. The second German fired from extended range. Tracers asked wide. Feedler disregarded them. He leveled off at 20,000 feet and checked his mirrors. The second German remained behind him, but at greater distance now. The first was recovering from his stall. The other two were somewhere above, repositioning, and Voss's flight was dispersed across 10 miles of airspace. Feedler was alone. 8 Germans. 1 Mustang. No assistance coming. He didn't panic. He calculated. He possessed velocity. He possessed altitude. He possessed fuel. The Germans possessed numerical superiority, but numbers were irrelevant if they couldn't coordinate, and they were already fragmented, pursuing different targets. He climbed, not steeply, just a steady, sustainable ascent. The second German followed. Feedler allowed him to close to firing distance, then pulled into a hard left barrel roll. The German overshot. Feedler rolled back right and slipped in behind him. The German spotted him and broke hard, diving left. Feedler didn't pursue. He climbed again. Another German approached from his right. Feedler turned into him head-on. Both opened fire. Neither connected. They flashed past each other at a combined velocity of 700 miles per hour. Feedler extended again, climbing. His airspeed was 310 now. Slow, but he was at 24,000 feet, higher than any of them. The Germans regrouped below him. 6 now. The other two had remained with the bombers. Feedler observed them form up. They were attempting to bait him down. He didn't accept the bait. He remained high. He orbited. He waited. 1 German broke formation and climbed toward him, alone, aggressive, impatient. Feedler met him halfway. He rolled inverted and pulled down into a slashing dive. Firing as he passed, the German flinched and broke right. Feedler didn't turn. He extended, climbed, and reset. The German formation fractured again. They attempted twice more to coordinate an attack. Both times Feedler utilized altitude and velocity to force them into low-energy vertical maneuvers. He didn't pursue. He didn't commit. He simply made them expend energy they couldn't recover. After 7 minutes, they disengaged. They dove east and fled for home. Feedler didn't pursue. He climbed back to 28,000 feet, verified his fuel, and rejoined the bomber stream. Voss and the other two pilots were already there. Voss asked where Feedler had been. Feedler reported he had engaged the upper group. Voss asked if he had claimed any kills. Feedler reported he had not. Voss asked what the purpose had been then. Feedler didn't respond. Back at Leaston, the intelligence officer debriefed each pilot separately. Feedler described the engagement thoroughly. The officer recorded notes. He inquired how long the fight lasted. Feedler estimated approximately 8 minutes. He inquired how many enemies Feedler engaged. Feedler reported 8. He inquired how many he had destroyed. Feedler reported none. The officer paused. Then he inquired what Feedler had done for 8 minutes, if he hadn't destroyed anyone. Feedler explained he had denied them the ability to attack the bombers. The officer asked how. Feedler explained. He forced them to maneuver vertically. He made them pursue him. He depleted their energy until they had to withdraw. The officer documented everything. Then he asked if anyone could corroborate it. Feedler admitted he had been alone. The report was filed. No kills, no damage claims, no confirmation. It went into a folder with 100 other reports from that day. But word circulated. That evening, in the officers' club, Briggs asked if the account was accurate. Feedler confirmed it was. Briggs asked how he survived. Feedler explained he didn't attempt to win. He simply made it too costly for them to remain. Derry overheard. He approached, drink in hand. He declared that survival wasn't the objective. Destroying them was. Feedler countered that the objective was protecting the bombers. Derry insisted you protect bombers by shooting down the fighters. Feedler responded that you also protect them by making the fighters withdraw. Derry stared at him. Then he said Feedler fought like a coward. Feedler didn't respond. He finished his coffee and returned to his quarters. But others had listened. Briggs asked Feedler to teach him the energy management system. Feedler agreed. They spent 2 evenings reviewing the charts. Briggs flew his next mission applying Feedler's principles. He returned undamaged. He told another pilot. That pilot told another. Within 3 weeks, 5 pilots in the 357th were employing variations of Feedler's system. None of them labeled it that. They simply said they were flying smarter. They maintained velocity. They maintained altitude. They selected their engagements. They withdrew when outmatched. Their survival rate improved. The operations officer, Major Callahan, noticed. He inquired what had changed. One pilot mentioned Feedler's notebook. Callahan requested to examine it. Feedler presented it. Callahan flipped through the pages, diagrams, tables, calculations, engagement sketches. He asked if Feedler had shared this with anyone else. Feedler confirmed a few pilots had inquired, so he had explained it. Callahan asked why he hadn't presented it to the operations staff earlier. Feedler reminded him he had attempted to. Callahan said, "Attempt again." A week later, Feedler stood before a room full of aviators and delivered a briefing. He utilized a chalkboard. He drew energy curves. He explained how velocity and altitude translated into tactical options. He demonstrated how to evaluate an engagement before committing, how to recognize when you were disadvantaged, how to disengage without being destroyed. Some pilots recorded notes. Others crossed their arms and appeared skeptical. Derry departed halfway through. But the statistics didn't lie. Over the next 2 months, losses in the 357th decreased by 18%. Kill ratios improved. Pilots returned with fewer bullet holes in their wings. The system worked. Other groups received word. A colonel from the 4th Fighter Group visited Leiston and requested a copy of Feedler's notes. Feedler provided one. The colonel brought it back to his squadron. Within a month, energy management principles were being taught in pre-flight briefings across the 8th Air Force. Feedler never claimed credit. He simply continued flying. He scored his first kill in June, ABF 109, that made the error of attempting to climb away from him. His second in July. By the war's conclusion, he had 6 confirmed kills. Respectable, but not exceptional. What was exceptional was that he flew 68 combat missions and never once had to bail out. Never sustained critical damage. Never lost a wingman. His crew chief, Kowalski, once inquired how he did it. Feedler replied he simply tried not to do anything foolish. Kowalski laughed. He observed that most pilots did foolish things every mission. Feedler said that was the difficulty. The war ended. Feedler went home. He didn't discuss his experiences much. He enrolled at Ohio State University on the G-bill and completed his degree in aeronautical engineering. He graduated in 1948. He obtained employment at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base working on flight test evaluation. He spent 30 years there analyzing aircraft performance, writing technical manuals, mentoring younger engineers. He never became famous. His name didn't appear in history texts. No one wrote articles about him. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't attend reunions. But his ideas endured. The energy management principles he systematized became foundational to fighter tactics. The Navy adopted them. The Air Force taught them. By the Korean conflict, every fighter pilot learned the concept of energy fighting. By Vietnam, it was standard doctrine. The Navy Fighter Weapons School later known as Top Gun, constructed its entire curriculum around it. John Boyd, the legendary fighter pilot and strategist, later expanded on the same concepts and developed the OODA loop theory. Boyd never encountered Feedler, but he studied the same after-action reports. He observed the same patterns, and he reached the same conclusions. Speed and position were more valuable than firepower. The pilot who controlled energy controlled the engagement. Feedler's notebook, the one he carried through 68 missions, ended up in the Air Force Historical Research Agency archives. It sits in a file box in Alabama, rarely opened, seldom referenced. But it remains there, a record of one quiet man's effort to bring logic into chaos. In 1987, a researcher named Dr. Ellen Shaw discovered it while writing a dissertation on tactical evolution in World War II fighter combat. She read it cover to cover. She located Feedler and requested an interview. He agreed. She asked why he believed his system worked when so many others didn't. He said it wasn't his system. It was just physics. She asked why more pilots didn't use it earlier. He said because most pilots didn't think they needed it. They thought courage was sufficient. She asked if courage wasn't sufficient. He said courage was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. She asked what was sufficient. He thought for a long time. Then he said understanding. Understanding your machine. Understanding your enemy. Understanding yourself. Courage made you willing to fight. Understanding made you able to win. Arthur Feedler died in 1993 at the age of 72. His obituary in the Dayton Daily News mentioned that he was a veteran, an engineer, and a father of 3. It didn't mention the 8 Focke-Wulfs. It didn't mention the notebook. It didn't mention that he helped transform how an entire generation of pilots thought about aerial combat. But those who knew understood. At Wright-Patterson, they named a conference room after him, the Arthur S. Feedler Flight Test Analysis Room. It's a small room, beige walls, a long table, a white board, the kind of place where engineers gather to solve problems no one else has figured out yet. There's a plaque on the wall. It reads, "Courage and calculation are not opposites. They are partners." That wasn't something Feedler ever said, but it was something he lived. And in the end, perhaps that's the better testimony. Not the words, not the fame, just the quiet, persistent application of reason under fire. The belief that even in war, especially in war, thinking matters. That logic carried into the cockpit and tested against gravity and violence and fear could be the difference between coming home and not coming home. He never mocked the instinct pilots. He never claimed superiority. He simply offered another way, a way that required patience, humility, and willingness to be ridiculed by people who didn't yet understand. He absorbed the mockery. He disregarded the doubt. And when the moment arrived, when 8 wolves filled his mirrors and no one was there to assist, he proved that mathematics wasn't the opposite of bravery. It was bravery's most reliable partner.